Okay, I'll admit it. It was me. I killed the Windows startup sound. Every time you start up your PC and hear nothing, well, I did that. And I'm sorry. Sort of. Let me explain. Sound has been an important part of the experience of using a computer for decades now. But it wasn't always that way. The building blocks of the modern computer were invented at the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center in the 1970s, packed with some of the smartest researchers of the time. So much of what we take for granted today was invented at PARC in this era. The two-button handheld mouse, bitmap displays, graphical user interfaces, WYSIWYG editing, folders and files, Ethernet networking, laser printers, drawing programs. It just goes on and on. In 1973, Xerox revealed the Alto, a truly revolutionary vision of what a personal computer could be like. In a world of IBM mainframes as large as a room, programmed via Amber terminals and punch cards, the Alto is recognizable even today as a computer. It's no wonder that when Steve Jobs and Bill Gates independently saw this technology in the 1970s, that they rushed to try to commercialize it as quickly as possible.
You and I are both like guys that had this rich neighbor, Xerox, that left the door open all the time.
Xerox itself turned its Alto prototype into a commercial version, the Xerox Star, which retailed for over $50,000 in today's money. And while you got all of these great features, one feature you didn't get was sound. Sound was just not viewed as being a crucial part of using a computer. So jump forward to 1981, and the first popular mass market computer was the IBM PC. And it came with a horrible piece of sound tech called the PC speaker, a tinny little single channel speaker designed primarily to beep loudly. It was mostly just used to notify you of the system status. And thus, the first startup sound was born. Your PC might beep once loudly to tell you it started up correctly, or multiple times to tell you if there was an error. Clever programmers tried to use its limited capabilities to simulate playing multiple tones at the same time, but doing so sounded horrible. It didn't work on all PCs, and it caused the processor to lag and become unresponsive.
Yuck.
The first Macintosh, introduced in 1984, had slightly improved sound capabilities, but when you powered on that first Mac, the sound was every bit as terrible as you heard when you turned on an IBM PC. It wasn't until 1991 that an Apple employee named Jim Reeks created the first version of one of the most iconic sound marks of all time, an expansive wash of C major chord played with overlaid strings and just a hint of percussiveness at the beginning. Over in the PC world, the sound hijinks were just heating up. The Nintendo Entertainment System was released in 1985 in the United States, and for the first time, millions of families experienced a home computing device playing glorious polyphonic 8-bit sound. Castlevania, for instance, was a straight-up banger. So when they went back to their computer and wanted to play games, the PC speaker suddenly felt like a decrepit relic of the 1970s. The same Castlevania music barely slaps at all. No matter how hard composers tried to make the PC speakers sound good, they couldn't. It stunk. Filling in this gap, in the 1980s, two sound cards, the AdLib PCMS and later the Creative Sound Blaster, broke through and finally sold enough hardware to gain widespread software support, bringing beautiful 8-bit sound to PCs. Now, Microsoft had been working on their own graphical user interface to compete with the Macintosh. And by the first truly popular version of their OS, Windows 3.1, many computers had one of these sound cards. And thus, for many in the PC world, their introduction to the world of graphical user interface was Windows 3.1's very curt but peppy startup sound. Enter the 1990s and the era of multimedia computers. CD-ROMs, with their ability to store 16-bit digital audio, led to a panoply of more powerful 16-bit sound cards, capable of playing better quality audio. Microsoft released Windows 95, which became the first true mega hit of the software world. Tens of thousands of people lined up at midnight to get their copy on launch night, much the same as they would for the first iPhone a decade later. And PCs that wanted to sport the coveted Design for Windows 95 sticker had to have sound support. Thus, the first big experience people had when they powered on their new computer every day was this. Of course, Windows 95 didn't stop at just the startup sound. It shipped with a full set of alert sounds and notification tones, and many people even bought the Windows 95 Plus pack, which included a dozen or so themes, each of which had a custom Microsoft-designed set of sounds. From here, every major Windows release had a new startup sound, and a lot of people cared a lot about these sounds, me included. I remember as a kid in college getting my hands on a new beta version of Windows, and the first thing I wanted to check out was, is there a new startup sound, and what did it sound like? Sometimes, as with Windows Millennium Edition and Windows XP, the startup sound bridged directly into a Getting Started app, which had its own music, heightening the sound ecstasy to never before seen heights. Windows Vista introduced a four-tone, synthy, futuristic brand mark. This sound paired well with the Fireflies animation created for the Windows 7 boot sequence, so it was left unchanged for Windows 7. Okay, so now we are at the crux of the story. Why did I kill the Windows startup sound, dooming it to the dustbin of history? Why did I destroy the source of so much joy and enthusiasm through the years? Well, flash back to 2008. The team was on the home stretch of putting Windows 7 to bed. We had started thinking about what was to come next. One of the things we did was to look at how and where people were using their PCs. Gone was the era of huge cow box Gateway 2000 heavy desktop computers. Most of the PCs being sold were laptops or netbooks, and that percentage was going up every year. With mobility came different considerations, PCs being used in places that would have been very unusual when Windows 3.1 came out, like in the bedroom or on the couch. We started planning for what became Surface in 2008, and our assumptions switched to mobile first. The team was porting Windows to ARM processors, and my team had started to design a touch-first tablet user interface, one which initially was totally separate and designed for different devices than classic Windows. I had an experience around this time with my MacBook Pro. It was late at night, we had a new baby, and it was my turn to get up in the middle of the night with her. I really wanted to start up my laptop to browse the web, but I couldn't remember if the volume was muted or not. I realized I had a 50-50 chance of pressing the power button and hearing that loud, resonant C major startup chime, waking up my sleeping wife and groggy infant, and that I had no way to control it. I opted just to keep my laptop closed rather than risk it. And at that moment, I had a flash of insight that having devices play a startup sound was a really bad feature for a device designed to be used in a person's most private and intimate spaces at any time of day or night. So I had my team remove the startup sound from Windows 8. But this isn't the end of the story. It was now a year later, and the tablet UI we were building was now alongside the classic Windows desktop, meaning that our tablet OS was slotted to be used for traditional PCs as well. I'm not going to go into that today, but let's just say I have a lot to say about that in the coming months. So subscribe and hit the bell if you want to hear the whole story. But as time passed, I started to regret removing the startup sound. Every week we spent 90 minutes or so listening to sounds to potentially include in Windows. Everything from the sound of an error, to the sound of the recycling bin being emptied, to the sound of a USB device being inserted but failing. There were almost 100 default sounds in Windows, and we had to design and style every one of them. Matthew Bennett, the sound designer who was creating these sounds, didn't know the startup sound had been removed. And so one day, as I prepped for our weekly sound review, I saw that the agenda included reviewing candidates for a new startup sound. I didn't say anything about it at the meeting, but there was one sound we thought was really good, and we agreed upon a set of alterations and variations we wanted to hear the next week. And within a month, we had a startup sound that we thought was great. At that point, I had come around to thinking that there might be other solutions to the problem of not waking people up in the middle of the night with a sound, like allowing you to mute on startup, or using the ambient light sensor, or making it at least an option for people to turn it on. It's worth noting that Apple themselves removed the startup sound in 2016 and only brought it back as an option in macOS 11, so we weren't the only ones to have reconsidered the place of startup sounds in the modern world. Anyway, I started down the path of getting the startup sound added back, but at this point we were in the last 6 months before a first public release, and I called a meeting with the VP in charge of the Windows Fundamentals team to let him know we were adding back the sound. Now, the Fundamentals team always had a difficult job, but for Windows 8 it was especially tough. Porting Windows to ARM was hard, and making an ARM-based tablet really work meant speeding up boot times, which were measured in minutes early in the porting process, and drastically reducing memory used. The main way they achieved both of these goals was by just not running a bunch of code that used to run in the startup process. Some of this code was delayed and run later, after the user interface was loaded, and other things were either combined into a single process or launched on demand. Well, it turns out that one of the optimizations the team gratefully made when I originally killed the startup sound was ripping out all of the code that loaded the sound into memory, along with all the code that supported the audio stack early in the boot process. When I told them I wanted to put the sound back, they resisted. Having it on by default meant adding almost a second to the boot process and tens of megabytes of memory used. They were already fighting hard and squeezing every ounce of performance they could, trying to meet their boot time and memory usage goals, and they were not excited about having to go backwards just to play a few notes out of the speaker. And truth be told, there were other things we were trading off with this team already, such as my desire to have font kerning running in the kernel, to make text in the boot process and the blue screen of death look better. So I decided to let this one go. That's the story of how I killed the Windows startup sound. And imagine, somewhere out there sitting on a hard drive is a sound that you might have heard every day for the last decade had I not made that fateful decision. Oh, and there's one more thing. That missing Windows 8 startup sound? I've got it actually, sitting right here. I tracked it down. Want to hear it? Subscribe to the channel and I will have it for you in the next video. That's all for today. As always, thanks for watching.